So I'm curious to know, Dan, what do you think, before we start this, before we really dig into it, what do you think caused the Bronze Age collapse?
I think I see a lot of parallels with the Roman Empire, and I know it's mentioned a lot as well. So you have uh, with the Bronze Age collapse, you have a major area with five or six major empires, and over the period of about 100 years, they all either diminish or go extinct. And Egypt is the only real survivor, but their empire is severely diminished from this. And I've seen a lot of things that drought had a big. Um, Drought was one thing that initially pushed people to migrate, and obviously there's wars and all those type of things. And it's interesting because whenever a huge empire of nations collapse, it's catastrophic because you don't just lose those nations, but you lose the trade, you lose the levels of mathematics and tool making and all those type of things, and the literacy. So literacy back in the ancient times was probably 2% for people to be able to read and write. But if you lose that 2%, then your writing is gone, and a lot of other things go with it. And that's why you go into those dark ages. And obviously from this, we've heard that there's a 400 period of not much history happening. So, and I think
that's the interesting thing. So essentially, what happens is, and I'm just going to come out and say, I think it was the sea people. I'm going to blame the sea people.
Okay.
I've got some theories on the sea people, but
Interesting.
I think the sea people is the main cause. Essentially, what happens is everything's going all grand and swimmingly in Bronze Age Mediterranean basin. Then all of a sudden, one day, bang, history ends. All written records end. The only clues we have is a letter saying the sea people are coming, which is an oversimplified version of what it is. But for the next 400 years, these civilizations, nothing really happens with them. The only ones that somewhat survive is Egypt. The Mycenaeans are gone. By the time history, or we can see something's happened, the Greeks are there.
Yep.
So a lot of the information of that period is lost, with a few little clues here and there. But even if you go and have a look at something that actually struck me, was I went to an exhibit on ancient Egypt, and they've got all these grand sarcophaguses from the period before the Bronze Age collapse, and certainly the period well after the Bronze Age collapse up to the Roman times. But then there was this one coffin from around about, or one sarcophagus from around about 1100 BC. And what struck me about it wasn't this grand metal looking bright sarcophagus. It was a very plain wooden, almost like a modern coffin in human shape. It didn't have any of the elegance, didn't have anything. So Egyptian society and I guess Egypt as a great power has never actually recovered from the Bronze Age collapse. Certainly it still exists, but nowhere near the same extent that it did previously. So that's the very brief overview of the Bronze Age collapse. So I guess let's where we want to talk about, I guess it's probably important to mention the sea people, who really are one of history's enduring mysteries. We don't really know who the sea people were, but what it looks as though was they were a combination of various different groups. Now, there's a lot of theories as to why these people
and they were named
banded
as well.
together. Yeah, they were, but and not all of the names. A lot of the names we don't know who they are. There's some that we can work out, namely the Peliset, who are probably the Philistines, as better known from the old ancient Bible, who
David and Goliath.
yeah, who most likely originated in Crete.
Yes.
But even then, there's still a lot of that's a theory.
Yeah. There's
There's still,
actually no concrete evidence of which area of the Mediterranean they came from. Yeah, there's lots of guesses and
or even if it was the Mediterranean they originally came from, because the
yeah.
sea people, there's a lot of different depictions of the sea people. You know, you've got some wearing what appears to be Viking helmets. You've got some with feathered headdresses. You've got some with sort of, you know, just bronze helmets. You've got some who are wearing what appears to be leather helmets. And the only reason we know what these people look like is from Egyptian carvings and Egyptian what the Egyptians have left us.
Yeah.
Now, the sea people didn't just come one day and attack and wipe everyone out. The battles with the sea people seem to have happened over a period of about 20 or 30 years. And initially, the first wave of sea people were driven back. Now, there's a lot of theories as to why the sea people chose to attack, whether it was just purely for conquest, whether they'd been forced out of other regions due to calamities, natural disasters.
Yeah.
There's a million different theories. And what I'm really looking forward to in this series that we're going to do is actually digging in, looking at who some of these groups could be. I mean, we hear Peliset. I mean, we assume Philistines, but really, I think it's an educated guess. I think certainly that's Dr. Klein does lean that way.
I think they're the only ones that like are the most likely to be the Philistines, whereas the other groups of the sea peoples are pretty much guesswork.
Yeah, look, there's suggestions that they might have come from areas such as Sicily, Sardinia, and other parts of mainland Europe. It is likely that they were a coalition of different people. But what's interesting in this collapse is all these great empires are suddenly gone and nothing seemingly replaces them. We don't have the sea peoples set up there and start their own empires and start writing in different languages, anything along those lines. Really, the first thing we get is, apart from some very basic hieroglyphics and Egyptian script, is the Greeks in the time of Homer, when he's writing about things like the Iliad, the Odyssey. That's really the next sort of clue of civilization in the area, with one exception, which is where I think something that we need to dig into a little bit. The only other real written account of anything happening in that time, I believe, is probably the Old Testament of the Bible. And look, just to clarify for those out there, I'm a staunch atheist. So when I look at the Bible, I look at it purely from well, I guess, you know, I can see the mythological side of it, and I can also, you know, appreciate the historical relevance of it, because it does provide a history and a story. Now, I don't believe everything that's in that. You know, that's just me. Dan, on the other hand, Dan runs a church, so we're coming at we'll be coming at this from completely different. Yeah. Ironically, Dan used to watch me preach at churches.
Indeed.
The tides have turned. How the tides have turned. That's a whole other story, and you can have a look at that one on my other channel. But I think that there is something there, and I think it's something that is worth looking at. It is worth looking at what the ancient Hebrews, Israelis were doing around that time. I actually even wonder if there's, and I say this having not deeply looked into it. I've tried to come into this as raw as I can, so when we're actually exploring this, I'm doing so from an academic lens, looking at the information and evaluating the information as we go.